Thanks, Mike, for agreeing to taking an interview as part of our retirees group at Plymouth State University.
Glad to do it.
I have a series of questions I'd like to ask you today, and you can pass on anything you want to.
Okay.
But I'm hoping by the time we're done, you will be prepared to share a story or two that has resonated with you for the years that you worked at Plymouth State.
Okay.
Okay, let's begin, please. What year did you arrive in Plymouth?
I arrived at Plymouth State, working at Plymouth State in 1986.
And at that time, was it Plymouth Teachers College, Plymouth State College?
It was Plymouth State College at the
There
time,
we go.
yes.
Thank you, thank you. You don't have to answer this one, but most people will. Do you remember your first year's salary?
And I don't. You know, it's funny, I saw that question and I thought about it and I was like, I couldn't even guesstimate what it was back then.
We'll let it go.
Okay. I'd be happy to share it if I knew what it was.
Can you remember how large the population of the student body population might have been?
I don't. You know, it's funny, that's a number that I probably should have known, but for some reason I thought that, you know, we were somewhere in the area of 5,000 maybe or something like that.
Could have been.
Yeah.
Sounds right for the 80s.
Yeah.
And I always have to ask, we never know if it's undergraduate or graduate.
Right.
Makes no difference. And then employees within your own department, do you happen to know how many people you had?
Yes, we had, I believe when I came on, for full-time employees, I think we had 7 full-time.
And let me reverse. What department did you work for?
At the time, it was called security, and then it eventually evolved into the University Police Department.
What responsibilities would you have?
When I was initially hired, I was hired as a patrol officer, so I was, you know, working regular shift work. We rotated shifts. You were either working a day shift, evening shift, or overnight shift. You know, 5 days a week, generally speaking, just doing campus patrol, law enforcement, unlocking doors, a variety of things, giving rides to students who needed them. Anytime that there was a problem that somebody didn't know how to solve, it ended up in our lap, and we did the best we could to try and resolve it. But and it was good because we had such a great working relationship with all of the other departments that, you know, nobody ever felt like they were imposed upon. It was really an interesting dynamic at the time.
I should ask you, where did you come from?
I originally came from Bristol, so I was raised in this area my whole life, and I moved to Plymouth probably in the late 70s, and then I went to work for the Plymouth Police Department in 1982, and then I transitioned over to the university because I wanted to get my education.
And when did you retire?
I retired in 2010.
And have you fully retired?
No, I have not. I took advantage of an opportunity to go back to the police department, Plymouth Police Department, where I started, and they hired me to do all their criminal prosecution. So I basically work in the court system doing the prosecuting and some other jobs within the police department.
Well, thank you for coming because you're still working.
Yes, my pleasure.
So how many years total were you employed at Plymouth?
24.
24 years. There we go. I'm trying to think of a connection that you would have had, obviously, with the students. You said that you helped them if they got locked out of their room, their car.
Oh, right, yeah. So students, obviously, we dealt with the parking situation. So, you know, getting students parking passes, and you know, students came to us when they were victims of various crimes, thefts, and that kind of thing. And of course, you know, if they got, like you say, if they got locked out of their apartments or locked out of their rooms and they couldn't get a hold of a residence hall director or something like that, we were sort of the de facto mom and dad to the rescue in a lot of situations. And so our day-to-day interaction with students was pretty significant.
I'm just trying to think of you and the students and the relationships that you might have had. Would you have seen students over and over again?
Yes, yes. Quite often we saw the same students over and over again, not always on good terms, but generally speaking, the fact that it's a small university, or at the college at the time, it was easy to develop relationships, good and bad, and you saw people's faces and you said, okay, I've seen that person before, and you, a lot of times they knew us by name, even if we didn't remember their names. Hopefully they remembered our names because we made a positive impact on them. That was the plan. And one of the things that's interesting is that in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a dynamic in colleges and universities, I think probably nationwide, that was a result of the Animal House movie, National Lampoon's Animal House. So coming into Plymouth State when I got here, Greek life was still a very big and active and dynamic part of the student experience. So we had a number of Greek houses, Greek organizations on the campus itself. So that created that whole culture of, you know, misbehavior and the alcohol and that kind of stuff. So those individuals who were members of those organizations were usually very active in the community overall, not just in the bad part, but they were well known, you know, members of athletic organizations and that kind of thing. So that was how we really interacted a lot more with them, and it wasn't always negative. I don't want to make it sound like it was, but that certainly had the potential to create more problems for us than we would like to have had given the situation.
Are you in a position to share, do the Greek organizations still exist on this campus?
And you know, I've heard that there's been a resurgence, but I don't think it's anywhere near what we saw. I mean, it died a slow and kind of miserable death over the years, you know, where they would, organizations would lose their charters for a variety of problems, and then the university was good about either tearing the house down or transitioning it into some other use on the campus. But there were a lot of buildings that were primarily a Greek organization, and they weren't always in that great a shape. You know, they like I said, they followed that Animal House culture, which, you know, good or bad, that's what it was.
Did you have a choice to come? Did you have other choices for this position elsewhere? I guess my question is, why did you decide to come? Why did you select Plymouth?
The reason I took the job was twofold. One was at the time, one of my neighbors had become the chief of university security, or college security, campus security. There was a lot of positive transitions in the department, trying to professionalize it, grow the department, do more student-related activities, get more involved in the community, do more proactive policing, try and solve problems before they began. And the second part of that, and it may have actually been, thinking back, the more important part to me, was getting my education. That had been something in my younger years that wasn't important, and I saw this opportunity of, gee, I can go to college for free, kind of immerse myself in the whole process. It seemed a lot easier looking at it from the outside at the time. And it was difficult because I was working rotating shifts, so I might be working midnights this month and 6 to 2s next month and day shifts the month after, so it was very hard. Fortunately, I was able to take classes and be able to work at the same time, and over a long period of time I finally got my degree.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
What would it have been in?
It was in general studies with a focus on criminal justice.
Nice.
I ended up doing that through Granite State College, but did a lot of my coursework at Plymouth State. So.
And they transferred?
Yes.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah.
Quite a few people had made that comment, that they had it's good benefit
Yep.
to be able to continue. Even at my age, with my white hair, I make the comment, I'd love to go back to school.
Yeah.
Just love to go back to
Yeah.
school. I think the longer we live, the more we realize we don't know.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So if I asked you, how did the kids change over the years?
When I first came here to Plymouth State, I think it was due mostly to economics. There was a lower threshold, if that's a word I want to use, for admissions. And I think the college community kind of suffered because we had a group of students who probably under different economic conditions would not have been accepted as students at Plymouth. And that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes it's an opportunity for people who maybe didn't do well in high school and they get to college and they're completely immerse themselves in the educational experience and they do well. But the downside is there's a lot of people who probably shouldn't have been here. And I think that had a long-reaching or far-reaching effect, because when the new students come in, what do they look to? They look to the students who've been here 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, and try to pattern themselves, oh, this is how we're supposed to behave. And at the time, there was a change. We had a new president, and he was kind of saying, okay, we're going to be looking for a better type of student, a student who's really got a more engaged interest in getting an education. And so the standards were raised. So that transition was interesting to see the behaviors, and I think that with eliminating the Greek life, we eventually saw a much better campus and a much better educational experience and a much better community experience, because sometimes the college community doesn't like to admit it, but what goes on here has a major impact on the entire community. And I think that, if we are willing to take responsibility for how what goes on here affects the community at large, at that time I think we saw a lot of major changes that were good for everybody. And that was kind of exciting to be in the middle of. Because you start comparing to okay, we have to prepare for this weekend because last year we had this happen, and this happened, but we'll prepare for the worst. And then we're standing around looking at each other and saying, why? Everybody's behaving. What's going on here? This isn't supposed to be the way it is. And that was a positive thing, and we enjoyed that. It was good to be able to take a deep breath and say, wow, maybe we had something to do with that.
I'm trying to think back. Some of the events that take place on this campus each year, when you people have to regroup,
yeah,
and figure out what you're going to do to make it the best experience for everyone involved, what would some of those events be that our audience might remember themselves?
When I first came to the police department in 1982, to the Plymouth Police Department, they were doing the tubing regatta. And the tubing regatta was something that was not a sanctioned event by the university or by the college at the time. It was just something, I think it was probably, thinking back, it was probably initiated by Greek life, because most of the fun things like that were a result of Greek life. And the tubing regatta just started out as a very fun thing where, we started having some warm days and the river was high and people were getting out there on their tubes and going up and down the river and having a good time. And then it just grew to the point where it was out of control. It was an alcohol-fueled event. And let's face it, you get a bunch of students in cold water in the springtime when the river's high and the students are high and the alcohol is flowing, and the next thing you know, you've got a potential for some seriously bad things to happen to people. And I think, remembering back, there may have been a few drownings as a result of that. So the town and the state, the Fish and Game got involved, and the Marine Patrol, and said, we need to start hammering down on this and doing something different. And the university stepped up and decided to do Spring Fling Weekend instead. And it worked to get everybody out of the river, which was something, that just had gotten so far out of control. And then started planning events on campus to keep everybody having a good time. And then that just grew, and some years it was challenging, to say the least. It was one of those events that's fueled by alcohol and misbehavior. and by a small percentage of the population. And unfortunately, the community at large, they don't see the 80% of the student body who aren't there partying. They're home working on the weekends or actually studying and doing those kinds of things. They only see the misbehavior.
It's still a tradition.
Yes, but Spring Fling Weekend has become such a small thing as far as how it impacts us. I mean, we still plan for it every year because you don't know, what the culture is going to bring, and it becomes less and less of a burden on public safety than it did in years past, which is good. I'm certainly not complaining about that at all.
I'll tell a short story. My daughter came home. She was a undergraduate at Plymouth State. She said, "Mom, I've never been down the river." This was just a handful of years ago. It was July. July, the month of July, is not when you want to come down the Hemmock. But my husband and I and she came down, and it was just so fun. Yes, we had to walk it. We had to walk it sometimes. Yeah. But because it had been a tradition during my undergrad, I had never done it. Here now with the students, I said, I'm going to try it out. Never do it in July, or you're going to do a lot of walking. But again, the river itself is beautiful.
It is.
Just beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a great tradition.
Yeah.
That the healthy part of it is a wonderful tradition. And I think there are families that will come back, students who have grown up, and they want to do it again. But in a little different way.
Right.
Little different way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you don't have hundreds and hundreds of people going there all at the same time, but yeah, the people are still tubing. It's just, and fortunately, without any major issues.
Nope, very few on that. Another event that maybe you have to prepare for.
Homecoming and family weekend. I mean, there used to be, if I remember back that many years ago, they were two separate events. There was family weekend and then there was homecoming weekend, and then they kind of married them together to make it into one. And again, that was another one of those theme weekends where it had the potential to be bothersome to the community, with the noise and music and alcohol fueled and that kind of thing. And again, it's not what it was several years ago, and I hope that's a trend that continues. Not just because it makes it easier for me, but because the community at large deserves to have that kind of respect from the college community as well.
Thinking when you started, can you pull off a few names that worked with you that some of our audience might be able to identify with? I'm talking about people on the force.
Oh yeah, geez, that's yeah, going back a lot of years. I mean,
Sure
when
is.
I came on, it was Bob Keeney. Bob had been here for a number of years before I got here. Rolla Blake, he was working here. I mean, he worked here when I was a teenager in high school, and I took driver's education with his daughter, and I were in the same driver's ed class, and he came in to speak to our class. So I mean, that was when I was 16, and then in my early 20s, I was working with him here. Scott Moore, who actually works back at the university now. He just started last year working for the University Police Department, doing security work for them. He worked here with us. Those are some of the people that I remember.
And then when you left Plymouth State the first time, who would be some of the people that you would have had to say goodbye to?
I would have said goodbye to Craig Doyle. He was the chief at the time. Peter Carachetti, he was the lieutenant at the time, and he's now with the Sheriff's Department in Grafton County. Aaron Como. No, Aaron had already left. He had gone to state police at that point, and then he came back again. Amanda Hutchins, she's still here. She's a administrative sergeant for the police department. She was a student officer when I worked here, so back when she was, I think, a freshman, she came to work for us.
She was my student.
Oh, was she? Yeah. Yeah.
Way back when, so I can still touch base with her every once in a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is really nice. After you arrived in Plymouth, really what was it about the college and the campus, perhaps, that made you feel this is the right position for me for now?
It's interesting you say that, because I tell people that, I came here primarily because I wanted to get my education. And so if that was my motivation for taking the job. One would think that once I had my education that I would move on and do something different, and yet I was here for 24 years. So part of that is you become comfortable. After so many years, you build up a salary that's reliable, and so you don't need to go to look somewhere else. I think my attitude when I came in was more like, I think I can endure this long enough to get my education, and that wasn't how it developed. And I don't think I noticed that right off, that I was comfortable here, until several years had gone by, and I had opportunities come up over the years. Nothing that was, earth-shattering that I had to stay awake at night deciding should I or should I not. But I did have opportunities, and I never gave them a second thought. So I think it was a very comfortable place to work, especially during the earlier years.
During the earlier years, was there a person, a colleague, or someone else that kind of acclimated you to the town, the position that you held?
I don't know about anybody specifically, but I mean, there were individuals that, were long-standing members of the university community that I always felt that I could interact with and get some history or advice. I mean, Chris Clark, he was great. I mean, George Maloof, Terry Downs, and then of course, Tim Keefe. You'll never get rid of Tim Keefe. I mean, he's still around. I mean, he was here doing our Christmas parade. He was the MC at the Christmas parade this weekend. Dick Hage. I mean, these were all people. John Clark. They were all people that. Peter Coffrin. I mean, all these people were
and
here.
Still here.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, some of them came here to go to school and never left, like you maybe. and that says a lot for the college community, that it has that kind of appeal, that somebody can come here with the intent of being here 4 years and then they end up becoming ingrained in the community. I think that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it is a wonderful thing. Let's see. Question that I've asked quite a few people: outside of your main job, did you ever get involved in any other capacity, committees on campus?
Yeah, I was the Speaker of the Senate for operating staff. I did that for a year, Speaker-elect and then Speaker for a year. I enjoyed doing that. I was on the Campus Safety Committee. There was another thing that was, there was a President's Committee that I was on, where we used to just meet once in a while with the President to kind of brainstorm. I can't remember what the name of the committee was, but there were people from various aspects within the college community, and I had gotten appointed to that, and that was always fun to be able to sit down with Bill Farrell and have brainstorm, talk about some ideas, and I think that gave me a really good perspective on those conversations where employees might sit around and say, like, why aren't they doing this or why aren't they doing that? And then I was able to actually find out why they weren't doing that. It wasn't because they didn't want to, it was because it wasn't practical, or there was some other decent reason why not. That was always enjoyable.
When you went, I'm going to go outside of the realm of Plymouth State University if I can.
Sure.
You're now working at for the town,
right?
Right? What was the position like? Are you allowed to say it was different here than there?
It was, to the extent of people seem to have this belief that the university sweeps things under the carpet. They hide things, when there's crimes or misbehavior and stuff like that, that they don't hold students accountable. And kind of an interesting story is that when I was being offered the job as prosecutor for the town, there was some concern within the management of the town that I wouldn't hold students accountable because I had been in the realm of not holding students accountable. And nothing was further from the truth. because I was probably one of the toughest ones on students and holding them accountable. I mean, I always believed that it's a learning experience. When you're an 18-year-old, you're an adult. Yes, you're a kid. Mom says you're a kid. You know, Grammy says you're a kid. But you're 18 and you're out in the real world. And if we don't treat you the same way at 18 that we treat the non-student who's 18, who's learning here? And so within the university, if a student got in trouble for something, they actually got hit twice. They got in trouble through the judicial system on campus, and they went to court. So, you know, if a high school kid from Plymouth gets arrested for possession of alcohol, he or she is going to go to court and they're going to pay a fine. If a kid on campus, they're going to pay a fine, and then they're also going to have to do some kind of sanction within the university, whether it's an educational component or something else, get put on probation, and you know, this happens again, and boom, you're out of here, and you've got to explain to mom and dad why a year's tuition went down the tube, that kind of thing. So I think that's the difference. And I think now, doing a similar job than what I was doing when I was at the university, I had to handle parents a little bit differently when I was at the university. They were kind of the ones who were paying the customer's bill. And now I don't have to be as gentle, I suppose, and I took a little bit of abuse from parents over the years, you know, willingly, you know, it was just, it was part of the job, and now I don't have to do this. So that's the difference, and it's not a huge difference. It's not like night and day, but if there is a contrast, that's probably it.
From the time you started at the university till you finished, in your head, can you remember the numbers of students that they were sanctioned for something? Did they go up over the years? Maybe, yes, because our population was going up?
You know, yeah, I think the numbers obviously went up because of the population. I think we could probably analyze it and say that during economic times when we changed the standards, we would see an increase in misbehavior. But I caution people, you know, over the years when I worked at the university and now, you know, back at the police department again, and somebody asks me, you know, oh, what do you do for work? Well, I work for the Plymouth Police Department. Oh, you must have an awful time with the students. And it's like, no, we don't. You know, it's like in any community, any organization, there's what I call the 2% rule. I don't care if it's the Rotary Club or the Lions Club or the Elks Club. You ask them, you know, what percentage of the people would you like to see out of here so that the organization could run smoothly? There's 2% that cause a problem. You know, you go to a town meeting, there's 2% that are there every year complaining. They never find anything good about what's going on in the town. And so when you get into a community like a Plymouth State University community, there's 2% of the students that go out and create a problem. That means that 98% of them aren't. Unfortunately, that 2% are out there at 2 o'clock in the morning in the neighborhoods yelling and screaming and keeping people awake. And so what do they see? They look out their window and it's all the students. All the Plymouth State students are doing this. And it's not, it's 2%.
I'm thinking, here I am, a student at 18 years old, I come to Plymouth. How would I know what I need to know so I don't get myself into trouble? Does the campus provide, do the security folks interact with the students as they come on campus?
I believe they do. I can't speak 100% for it now. I know that when I was here, we would do, when there was orientation, we would always go and speak at orientation, and we would tell them what the expectations were. We had pamphlets that explained all the town ordinances, what the expectations were, and that, you know, we always try to make it a positive thing. If you need something, come see us. You know, it's not, you know, don't wait till you're in trouble before you approach us. You know, develop a relationship. These are the expectations. This is what's going to happen if you don't meet these expectations. And I think that had a positive effect on keeping it at 2%.
Is there a story that you can tell us? Are you allowed to do that without names? Something that has stayed in the back of your mind all these years? Or maybe it happened recently that would involve security? I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, and that's good, you know. You know, there are so many stories, so many things that happen. I can't think of any one specific. Of course, you know, on my way back to my office, I'll probably, oh, I should have shared that. But off the top of my head, I can't think of any one specific. And there was a lot of happy stories, a lot of funny stories, and then, you know, there was some tragic stories over the years as well. Fortunately, yes, exactly. The tragic stories were minimal, and unfortunately, to be expected again in any community, you're going to have that, and in spite of your best efforts to avoid it.
Well said. Well said. We have just a minute or two. Have we missed anything that you'd like to share with our audience?
No, I think other than getting my point through again, that it's a positive thing having the university in the town, and that if people look at it overall, what it does for the community, I think they could have a greater appreciation for it, and you know, don't focus so much on those negatives, because the negatives are just a small part of it. Just unfortunately, it's the part that gets seen, and that's.
But you have said, based upon what you said today, the town and the town have worked together for a lot of years.
They have, and that's something that I think a lot of people, the folks that I mentioned, you know, the John Clarks and the Peter Coffrans and folks like that really put an effort over the years, back when there was so much turbulence from that Animal House era and whatnot. And I can remember that there were times when people would say, you know, we have this issue, let's go to the university and see if they'll help. And there was never, I mean, you always saw, you know, you could call maintenance and they would come and take care of a town problem. Nobody ever questioned that. It was like, oh, well, that's a town's problem, we're not going to do it. Oh yeah, we'll send our piece of equipment and go ahead and do it. And everybody was always appreciative of it.
That's nice to hear.
Yeah.
I just think of that era of the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. And with the amount of growth that happened here, you would expect a little bit of turmoil,
Yep.
the word that you've used. And yet I've heard many people share that they've worked together. This is what we've done together, which is so important. Yeah. Thank you, sir, for coming in. 30
My
minutes
pleasure.
Felt like 5 minutes.
It did. It was enjoyable. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.